school and stay at school. And then I just pick a couple of other reasons from our discussions in Finland why the teacher education at the universities are attractive. So first, teacher education is very similar to other academic fields, and it's free as other education in our country. Teachers' salary is not the main reason. So salary of teachers are the middle of the scale, but it's not bad. It's not good, but it's appropriate. And already mentioned that teachers are educated at universities in 5-year master level programs. And I think, and my colleagues think, that is one important reason why teacher education is attractive. It's compared to other fields at the universities, and the studies are similar, the theses are done, and it's an academic style of education. And secondary teachers have been educated quite a long time at the universities. Primary teachers during the last 40 years. I think already mentioned that it's a similar profession than other academic profession. It's not the vocational training, it's not the vocational occupation, it's an academic style of profession. The school side operations are friendly for teachers. We are not having heavy control or inspection. Teachers are main actors in education. They are responsible for pro-planning, and classroom level assessment is important, not heavy testing. National education policy is supportive for teachers. The political trust universities. They are giving autonomy to universities and also to schools, and they are happy with the operations we are having. And maybe also the historical reasons should be mentioned, that there has always been the highly appreciation to teacher profession in my country. So I know that in Norway there are very similar characteristics in the education field, but these are working in Finnish context. So the next slide. In Finland, if you ask anybody from teacher education what is the most important characteristics, it is the research-based teacher education. And what is the meaning of that? So the teacher educators as such, they are forming a research communities. Everybody should have a PhD, and in order to be employed at the university, you have to make a good record in research and publish in international journals, and you have to demonstrate the competence for applying money for research projects. It's a very similar than other fields. Our programs are based on research. We are not having heavy national guidelines. There is a short one-page list of national aims, but mainly the programs are based on the research related to teaching, learning, teacher education. And student teachers have to make theses. They have to learn research methodology. And I think this academic orientation is important part of teachers' professional identity, even it is a challenging concept, but anyway. And then when we are making national level progress, the ideas are not coming from the politicians. We are doing collaboration. We have a National Teacher Education Forum, and the activities are very research-based activities. The next one. So the quality, of course, in Finland, we are looking for good quality, but likewise, other countries, we are not controlling the output. We are not having accreditation, so it's enough you are having master level degree. We are not having inspectors, we are not having testing, and there is not heavy evaluation of teachers in the job. Next. So instead of controlling output, we are somehow controlling input. We are heavily selecting students to the programs. Everybody had to take heavy studies, 5-year studies. Teachers should and are willing to plan together school curricula. We are willing to plan together teacher education programs at universities. Teachers in main person in assessment and not heavy control, but self-assessments are important. And the final. We use quite a lot of time for selecting the students to the programs, and there is this kind of picture we are following the ideas in the picture. It's a kind of research-based model for planning the selection procedures to teacher education, and especially the interviews are made based on this kind of multidimensional process model for teaching. It's describing what kind of competencies teachers should have, what kind of professional knowledge, what kind of professional practices are needed, and what is the role of professional engagement for professional learning. So the selection is a research-based activity in our universities. So that was my contribution to the seminar, though, why we are not having lack of teachers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think we'll just move on, and our next panelist is Marilyn Cochrane-Smith.
Hello, everybody. I'm Marilyn Cochrane-Smith, Cawthorn Professor of Teacher Education at the Lynch School of Education and Human Development, Boston College in the US. I've been a teacher education practitioner, researcher, and policy critic for 45 years. You can go to the slide. I want to say, by way of introduction, that recruiting and retaining teachers in the US, and you're going to hear practically the opposite of what we just heard about Finland, is complex, often controversial, and uneven across areas. And I'm going to ask that you keep these three words in mind, almost as a prefix to every other point that I'm going to make. Okay, next slide. Some of the challenges with recruiting have to do with the sheer size and scale in the US. With a population of 330 million people, the US has 3.6 million teachers. There are more than 2,200 teacher preparation programs and universities, and then there are additional programs through various kinds of alternate routes. Also, every one of the 50 states has its own set of regulations and policies related to education. A second issue, often in the media and in policy, US teachers are portrayed as what I think of as both culprits and saviors. They're portrayed as culprits in that they're perceived as the major cause of whatever people think is wrong with the schools and with education. But at the same time, they're also perceived as saviors. That is, they're assumed to be the ones who should solve all of the problems. A third challenge is the US has many shortage areas. I've listed a few of them here. But this looks different in different regions of the country, as I said, across states, across school districts, across more well-resourced and poorer resourced areas. Also, there's been a significant drop in enrollment in teacher preparation programs in the US for the last 10 years. And a particular problem is that there are few teachers of color entering teacher preparation programs and then entering teaching. Even though the US public school population is 55% students of color, 80% of the teachers are white. A fifth challenge that has to do with recruitment in the US is that, unlike some other countries, as you just heard, college and university is not free, which means that many students, including teacher candidates, have to make significant financial sacrifices and often incur heavy student debt in order to complete their college and university programs. And this is coupled with the last item on this slide, the fact that teacher salaries in the US are not comparable to the salaries of other jobs requiring similar education. They're lower. So that's just a few of the challenges we face in recruiting. Next slide, please. And then this slide outlines some of the challenges in retaining teachers. Retention is a major problem in the US. Nearly every state had unfilled positions in certain areas last year, and as many as 50% of new teachers leave the profession within 6 years. Now, as the first bullet shows, many teachers leave because they can't fulfill their own expectations about meeting students' needs and enhancing their learning. They don't feel successful at what they're trying to do. This is often related to school conditions, and I've represented this with 3 bullet points on the side. So teachers leave because of a lack of autonomy, very close monitoring and surveillance of their work, and narrow accountability measures. They leave because of the heavy, multiple demands of the job, which were exacerbated by the pandemic. And they often say they leave because of unsupportive school cultures, along with inadequate resources for teaching and supporting teachers. The next to the last bullet on the slide, again, salary is an issue in teacher retention. The level of teacher salaries in many places is simply not enough to support a family. So in some places, it doesn't seem to be enough to make a living and make a life. And finally, periodically, within US society generally, and in the print and social media, there is teacher bashing, blaming, shaming, and characterizing teachers as lazy, poorly educated, or not committed. Now, that's not all the time, and that's not everywhere, and that's not in every media outlet, but there's enough of it to definitely be noticeable. So again, I'll conclude because I'm already over my time, but keep in mind, all of this is very complex, often controversial and politicized, and uneven. Thanks.
Thank you, Marilyn. So we got a quite different picture from the first one that Jari presented here. And moving on to England, there might be other differences as well. So Beng Huatsi, please.
Yes, hello. Yeah, my name is Beng Huatsi from Durham University, and I'll be presenting some of the findings and understanding of teacher supply and complications of teachers' retention in England.
Excuse me, Beng, do you want to turn on your camera?
I'm trying to hide actually. Yeah. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, okay. So we have a similar problem and challenges as in the US, very similar, teacher bashing, social media, negative portrayal of teaching, etc., and also salary comparable, incomparable salary compared to other similar professions. But what I'm trying to say is that in England, we have quite a peculiar situation, but the main challenges are the increasing pupil population, and that has led to an increase in demand for teachers. And the demand for teachers has also increased as a result of other government policies that have come in the last 5-7 years. For example, the extension of school leaving age from 16 to 18, more students are staying on in school, the introduction of GCSE, which is the final year secondary education exam reform, and the introduction of English baccalaureate, which increases demand for maths and science teachers because students have to do more sciences now. And that has put a pressure on the increase in the demand for science teachers, which are traditionally already subjects which we struggle to recruit. And if you look at this slide here, you can see that the number of postgraduate entrance, ITT stands for initial teacher training, entrance into teaching, has fallen short of the targets over time. If you look at from 2013, 2014 onwards, the targets have the number of teachers that we can recruit has fallen short of the targets quite substantially because we have to raise targets every year due to these education reforms being introduced. So that is one of the challenges. And then the other challenge is that we do not have enough STEM subject graduates coming in to meet the demand for STEM subject teachers. We are actually at the moment, over the past few years, already recruiting about 40% of our maths graduates and about 25% of our science graduates. Science is a very broad subject, includes like, physics, chemistry, biology, biosciences, astronomy. So it's a very big population, and we are already recruiting about 20 to 25%. So we are actually recruiting quite a lot. So to meet this challenge, I think the government will have to increase the number of graduates in those subjects before we can meet the targets. Now, finally, I would like to say that, like as in America, we also have the problem of recruiting enough ethnic minority teachers. Although the number of ethnic minority teachers in schools has increased over the last few years, that is a positive sign. But the proportion of applicants being accepted into teacher training from the ethnic minority group is not. In fact, the gap between the proportion of ethnic minority teachers being accepted as opposed to those proportion of a white majority is actually growing. In other words, we are recruiting or accepting fewer ethnic minority teachers in training compared to white majority. So that is an area that we have to watch out for. Why are our teacher training institutions accepting fewer ethnic minority teachers? It is not that there are no applicants. There are applicants. Then we have got more applicants. In fact, I wouldn't say UK, but England is in a peculiar situation in the sense that we have more applicants than there are places available, and yet we have the acceptance rate is very low. About 30% of our applicants are rejected, and the figure is even bigger for ethnic minority teachers. For example, we have for the white majority teachers, 68% are being accepted into teacher training. For the Black minority, only 46%. So it's about 54% of applicants are rejected. So these are the challenges that we are facing at the moment. And that is what our research is about, trying to understand and find out why that is the case. So yeah, this is the table or graph that shows you that the number of subjects over the years that has not met the number of subjects that's not met the target has also increased over the years. So traditionally it was just maths and science, but now over time you can see that more and more subjects are not meeting the targets, and we only for drama, history, physical education, classics, we are able to meet the targets, whereas the number of subjects that have not met the target has increased over the years. So these are some of the challenges. And final slide is just a summary of what we are facing at the moment in England. Thank you.
Thank you, Beng. So we'll be moving on now to Singapore, which is another different story. And Woon Chia, we're looking forward to finding out a little bit more about the situation in Singapore.
Hello, good day to you. I'm Woon Chia Liu. I'm a trained teacher and I taught chemistry and maths in secondary school. I'm currently the Dean of Teacher Education in Singapore's only Teacher Education Institute. So we prepare all the teachers, train all the heads of department and all the school leaders. As Dean of Teacher Education, I strive to develop autonomous thinking teachers with a strong sense of professionalism for Singapore. So that's just a brief introduction. I want to share that actually the picture in Singapore is perhaps closer to Finland. We don't really have a big challenge in terms of recruiting and retention. Elaine, can I have the next slide? Although our scenario is optimistic like Finland, I do want to share that actually Singapore is not only a very small country, but it is a very young country. Whatever we achieved, we are actually only 57 years old. Whatever we achieved, the enviable education system is all achieved within one generation. Okay, I want to say this hopefully as a form of encouragement. I just want to say that at a point in time when Singapore gained independence in 1965, Singapore was just a fishing village. So looking at the marshland, it would be impossible to imagine that Singapore would become what it is today. And I want to say that at that point in time where we didn't have highly qualified teachers, there wasn't even a teacher education institution that prepares teachers full-time, something really made a difference. Our founding Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, said this in 1959. And that was actually before we became independent. So at that point in time, even at the very, very onset, just before nation building, he was very clear that education is Singapore's way of survival. We had no natural resources. We are a very small country, but he believed that the most important influence is the teachers. So he has always said that teachers are our national priority, and we need to make sure that we see teachers as professionals. Okay, I said this because this lays the foundation of everything we do. And because of that, there are certain emphases that are put in place. So from the beginning, not only that there's no teacher bashing in Singapore or very minimal teacher bashing in Singapore, it's a political decision that we want to make sure that teaching is a preferred choice, a preferred career. So the next slide. In Singapore, teachers have very high status. And this is actually something that is very intentional. Becoming a teacher is one of the top career choice among young people. So you have your lawyers, you have your doctors, and teachers would be probably among the top 5. It probably would change a bit in recent years because it has been seen as a very demanding career, but it is still a top choice. And there is very high recognition in terms of the contribution. We always say in Singapore that teachers hold the future of our nation in their hands. And every time when there is opportunity, we have the President Teachers Award, we have, so it's recognized at really the top level in terms of recognizing that teachers are the people who play a huge role in shaping our young people. And this is possible to have this high status and symbol for a few reasons. Okay, one of the really very important reasons is that we have very high bar for entrance, which is what Yari has shared. There's quality preparation. I will not go into that at this point in time. We can discuss more. Competitive remuneration and career development. What Marilyn has mentioned, as well as what Yari has mentioned, teacher autonomy. And I think one of the last things that I want to highlight is seen as a meaningful and respected career. I think it's important for teachers to believe that they can make a difference. They are empowered to be able to do something so that meaningfully they can contribute to the growth of our young people as well as the future of the country. So in a nutshell, well, in summary, Singapore doesn't really have huge problem in attracting. In fact, for every position we have in our institution, there are 10 people vying for it. We have one of the longest postgraduate diploma in education in the world. It's 16 months. So there are 2 main ways to get into teaching, and they all have to go through our NIE. The first is through our PGD program, where we will take in students who have a first degree in the subject that they are teaching. So if you're going to be a maths teacher coming into our PGD program, you are likely to have to major in mathematics. In fact, we have excess of STEM teachers, so much so that to come into our PGDE, you must at least have a first class honors or second upper. The other route to come into into teaching in Singapore is through our undergraduate course. It's a double major program. So the first major is academic discipline. If you're going to be an English teacher, you would teach, your first major is English and your second major is education. So not only are they in a double major program, our degree program is an all scholars intake, and the government sponsor them for both PGDE and our degree program. So the PGD students are actually paid a salary that is comparable to a starting pay of a civil servant. So all these make teaching attractive in a sense, and it helps us in terms of recruiting. In terms of retention, there are slightly different factors, but teacher autonomy, making sure that the career is meaningful, as well as providing career development and support are important factors. I've used up my 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so 4 quite different stories here about what the situation is in 4 different countries. And we've heard comments about historical issues and societal issues and educational issues and lots of different things that might be different in the countries as well. Beng, I've asked you to report on a little bit of the results from the review that we did. There won't be all that many results, but just a little bit about what we know about recruiting and retaining teachers from the review of research that's been done and from other research projects. So Beng, if you could just take us a little through this.
Yes, this is like a quick whistle-stop tour of the review. So I just start off with some data from the TALIS survey, looking at the responses from various countries. This is for lower secondary teachers and what they report as the reasons for going to teaching and whether teaching is the first choice career. And I highlighted those countries that are represented here today, like Singapore, Norway, Finland, and England, and USA. And you can see where we all stand. For England and USA, under 60% of teachers say that teaching was the first choice career. In Singapore, it's much higher. And you can see why teaching is much more preferred a profession in Singapore than in other countries. And in Finland, I'm quite surprised, it's only 60%. And these are the, go on to the next one. These are the motivations. People say what motivates them for going into teaching. And if you can see again, Singapore is represented by the black bar, very high for almost all reasons. And Norway is quite low down for most of the reasons why people choose to go into teaching. I think for the Norwegians, most people choose to go into teaching because they want to influence young people. They want to contribute to society, very altruistic reasons. And for England, people go into teaching because it's a steady career. They want to influence young people. They want to contribute to society. And they also, because it's a secure job. So these are the reasons why people from different countries report wanting to go into teaching. And so what our review does is we look at all the international studies and we look at what these studies report people in those countries say reasons for going to teaching. And these studies include a survey of pre-service teachers, in-service teachers, as well as students who are still in school who have not yet fully made the decision about their career choice. So we identified about 517 studies, and of all these studies, we included 212, but in the analysis and synthesis, we only included 66 because the others are so weak in evidence that they don't actually add to the evidence. For each of the studies, we actually rate them. We give them a rating from 0 to 4. 4-star rating means very strong in evidence in large scale studies with comparison group, and 0 means very small scale, maybe 5 to 10 teachers interview. So it doesn't add to the evidence. So this is the result from our systematic review. We found that overall, in general, most of the studies identify 3 important reasons: intrinsic, altruistic, and extrinsic factors as reasons why they choose to go into teaching. The only difference between the studies is in the order of importance. It varies with subjects. STEM subject teachers, for example, are more likely to choose to go into teaching because of their interest in the subject, for example. And by gender, okay, and by phase of education, whether it's primary, early years, or secondary education. Next. For men, they're more likely to be motivated by salary than females. And they're more strongly influenced by social norms and certain expectations of what men's career should be like. They're more concerned with social influence, for example, prestige and status. And they're least likely to choose primary or early years. I mean, these are all I'm generalizing the results. Of course, there are some differences. Because of fear of how society and family and friends might view them, some teachers report, these are from some of the qualitative or what I call interview data, that they report how parents look at them quite suspiciously if they have to work with their very young children. And for women, on the other hand, they're more likely to be motivated by intrinsic altruistic reasons. And the reason why altruistic and intrinsic factors come out top in all the studies is because most people who go into teaching tended to be females. And they are more likely to say they want to contribute to society and working with young children. And I don't have a slide here, but across countries, there are slight differences. For example, East Asia, Southeast Asia, students most likely to be motivated by interest in subject, followed by social contribution. And in Africa, it's the positive school experiences, the role models that the teachers set for them that encourage them to go into teaching. In the Middle East, students were more motivated by job security, ability to provide for the family. And in the Western democracies, I include Australia, New Zealand, Canada. These are and the USA. In this kind of Western democracies, teaching is often not a first choice career for majority. It is their innate interest in teaching, it's their self-efficacy, they believe that they have an ability to teach, and their desire to contribute to society and the knowledge of young people. These are the motivating factors. So it's a quick summary of what we have found. And from other research, we found that also that the reason why we come up with all these three factors is because most of the studies in this area, in this field, tend to use the fitness factors influencing teaching as a career choice questionnaire instrument, which is quite limiting. So most of the factors are around intrinsic, altruistic, or altruistic reasons. Whereas most of the studies do not include the demographic factors, which have which may play an important role in people's decisions to go into teaching or not. And there are quite strong demographic factors we found. For example, people's choice of subject in the university, their entry qualifications also determine whether they are likely to go into teaching or not. People with lower entry qualifications, 2-1, for example, rather than first, are more likely to go into teaching. People with a combination of the vocational qualifications and the A level are more likely to go into teaching. People from lower socioeconomic background are more likely to go into teaching. So these are factors which have which may influence people's decision to go into teaching, but are not accounted for in many of the fit choice career questionnaire. And and many of these studies also do not compare people who have made the decisions to go into teaching, people who have considered but decided not to go into teaching. So when we compare people who have considered teaching and decided not to go into teaching with people who have considered and decided to go into teaching, we found that there are key differences. And one of the key, maybe 3 key differences is that for people who have considered teaching and decided not to go into teaching, the status of the vocation, the status of teaching, the pay, not just pay, initial pay, but pay over the long term, career prospects, these are important to them. So I think for policies to improve or to attract more people to go into teaching, I think we should focus on that group, the people who have considered but decided not to go into teaching. Currently, the policies in England and many other countries are focused on people who have already made the decision to go into teaching, people who are interested in teaching. So all the advertisements and marketing campaigns tend to focus on making a difference to children's education, making a contribution to society. Now, these kind of policies are wonderful, but they only appeal to people who have already an interest in teaching. What we should do actually is to make it more appealing to people who have thought about teaching but decided not to, and how can we increase entice or encourage more of these people to go into teaching. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Beng. And you've brought us very nicely into the next topic, which will be a discussion about how we can make teaching more attractive. And one of the things that you just mentioned at the end, that we perhaps base our policies and our thinking on people who are already in teacher education, and how can we get others to consider going into teaching as a profession in the future. But now our panelists have listened to each other. They've heard a few things from the different countries. And I wonder if we could just start with a little, some thoughts on, well, what do you think we really need to do now if we're going to for instance, increase the number of teachers in the United States, Marilyn? I mean, what do we need to do? What could be ways of making teaching more attractive? And we don't have all that much research on this, because now we're talking about what we believe and what we think based on the work that we've done and otherwise based on our knowledge of teachers of teaching and teach education. So, but perhaps we can start with you, Marilyn, and ask, well, what do you think?
Thank you. This is such a hard question. I also was a teacher before I entered teacher education. So there are four things I think that could make teaching more attractive in the US, but every one of them is really, really difficult to change. So I'm going to say them, but I'm not sure policy can change some of these things. So for example, well, one thing that policy could do is to change teacher salaries. But again, these are determined in the US, not even at the state level, but at the school district level. So there are districts in the US that are right next to each other within the same state, and they have different pay scales, although there are geographic differences as well. And then not having to pay for college. But that's a huge thing. We have some politicians who've run on a platform for president sometimes who have that as part of what they're interested in, but that would be a huge, huge change in the US. I think it'd be great, but I don't think it's likely. So the money issues are certainly there. A huge issue in the US is to change public perceptions and change comments in the media about the kind of job that teaching is and the regard that people have for teachers. At the beginning of the pandemic, when kids were home for a little while, everybody was saying, wow, teaching is really a hard job. I can't even handle my 2 children at home. That didn't last very long. So that we have had surveys for years where parents say they think their individual children's teachers and their individual schools are good, but in general, education is problematic and teaching is problematic. So how do you change what people say in the media? How do you change public perceptions? The third thing is the work environment. And again, this is so uneven across the US, but we need cultures of schools that are organized for students to learn and organized for teachers to learn, and with enough resources and enough support for teachers that they get help at the beginning in terms of how they're able to succeed as teachers. And the fourth thing, I think we've heard this as a theme in just about what everybody said, is that teacher autonomy and teacher agency are really critical. So it seems that when teachers have more of a sense of autonomy, when they are more agentic in a sense, they're more likely to stay in teaching and maybe they're more successful. But again, that's not an easy thing. And none of these, I don't think any of these could be changed by singular policies. This is a really complicated thing. It's historical, it's political, it's economic. So, I mean, I don't know how we start. Certainly there are policy things that could be put in place. I know, for example, some people are proposing that we have money for tuition in programs that is provided for teacher candidates at a certain level. And then if they teach in the schools or certain kinds of schools, that loan gets forgiven over time. So that would be an attempt to address the college tuition issue. I'm in favor of that. As a matter of fact, we used to have that when I went into teaching and when I was in college in the late 60s, very early 70s, part of my tuition was paid for eventually because I taught schools. So we don't have that in place now, but there are some people who are advocating for that as a policy. So I'll stop there, but I think there are many things we could do. They're really complicated.
Yes, we do have that in place in Norway, but we haven't really seen an increase in recruitment all the same. But you were also talking about the work environment and how demanding the career is, how demanding it is. And Woon Chia, you also mentioned a little bit about in Singapore that this might be changing. And what is it that's so demanding? And is there anything we can do there?
Okay, for Singapore, I think partly it's also because of workload. I mean, from the OECD, the Teacher Global Status Index that was actually surveyed in 2018, Singapore teachers actually work 52 hours per week and is one of the highest in the world. So because of that, it's probably a bit less desirable for young people. And it didn't help that during the pandemic, I think there was a lot of stress. Actually, for Singapore, we were lucky in the sense that we only closed school for 1 month. We closed school completely for a month where there was home-based learning. After that 1 month, there were a few days of home-based learning per week, but by and large, school resumed. Having said that, it meant that the teachers at that point in time not only had to prepare lessons to teach face-to-face when the students are in school, they also had to cater to students who couldn't come to school. So there had to be online preparation, they had to take attendance, they had to do contract tracing. There were a lot of things that teachers had to do at that point in time, because we just had to make sure, the teacher had to help make sure that the COVID situation was contained. So that sort of had a spillover effect. Although we never had issue in terms of attracting talents as well as retaining, we sort of now at this point in time, we are also trying to see, what is the fallout from COVID? Because I think a lot of teachers are very tired.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, and what about you, Yari? Is there anything that you see that is positive about attracting that you think would be able to learn from or be able to do other places?
So what already has mentioned this policy and salary, public picture and work environment, teacher autonomy, they are important. About this comment about this work environment. So in Finland, even we have had quite good situation, we have enough applicants. So there was a kind of trend about 5 years ago, 4 years ago, that the number of students who were applying to the teacher education, it was slightly decreasing. And then there was a national survey for student teachers that what they think, what might be the reason why the applicants, number of applicants is decreasing, and the working environment was the main reason they thought. And what we mean with the working environment, I think based on my reading and the answers, so it's much related to the use of resources. So how much there is resources for flexible grouping and organizing inclusive education, how much there is special need education support available in the classrooms. So that kind of issues were main reason why our student teachers were thinking that there is a minor drop. The profession as such was seen quite attractive, and also the digitalization, what was very much emphasized in that time, that was also considered as positive. But something to add. So I hope that you recognize that the reasons why we consider in Finland the teacher profession quite attractive are easily adopted by the kind of basic motivational theories. So that human beings have those basic psychological needs, and of course it's also in the case of teachers. So the kind of relatedness is important. They are feeling they need each other and doing things together. And in practice, the teachers in Finland, they have to make this local level planning, and they are nowadays even allocated 100 hours per semester for this kind of planning and doing things together and organize the quality work, no external quality work, but the internal quality processes. And the second psychological need is autonomy. So human being is looking for autonomy. So if there is a good condition, no external heavy control, testing, inspectorates, so you feel quite autonomous in your profession. And the third one is competence. So people consider that 5-year university training give you the good competence, and for example, families, even nowadays, trust very much teachers, and in the PISA survey, there is school questionnaire questions that how much teachers feel pressure from the family side, and it's almost zero in Finland, so no pressure. So the families see that teachers have high competence. So these three psychological needs, relativeness, autonomy, and competence, are quite well met in teacher profession.
Right. And maybe that's what we really need to get at, sort of these overarching values or ideas that that can be reflected in very many different ways, really, all depending on the country, but they might have a similar type of value. So autonomy can look differently in different places, but there's still that issue of autonomy that is important. And what is important in the different countries? What does autonomy mean for teachers in different countries? That would be sort of one key value. And you mentioned relationships. In the review that we did, we also found that one of the important reasons why teachers would stay in a job and not quit had to do with working environment, the feeling of support from colleagues and from principal, and also the perception of enough resources to do a good job. And that, of course, can be different too in different countries. But feeling that you have the resources to do the job that you're set out to do, or you have set out to do, that could also be something that matters here. So Beng, have you picked up anything here in the discussion that you think that you'd like to elaborate on, or just to point at as important for attracting people into teaching? Like, what do we do with STEM teachers?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what has been said so far. You know, in England, we have got lots of financial incentives and bursary schemes for STEM subject teachers, for shortage subject teachers. And, you know, it can be, you know, people can be earning as much as £32,000 a year, for example, £34,000 a year, which is equivalent to initial pay for some professions. So teachers' initial pay is not bad. In England, it's quite good. It's the career progression. And the workload, although the government has done a lot of, you know, schemes, introduced a lot of schemes and done a lot of work to make workload you know, better for teachers. We have got a workload strategy. We have got you know, early career framework to support new teachers in terms of mentoring and induction. Now, this didn't work very well. We have got a lot of programs like you know, taster session, future teaching scholars, where people do their undergraduate degree in the subject they're going to teach, and then they get training as well, and they're paid to do that. But these projects, you know, did not work as well as in Singapore. I think part of the reason is because of funding. And also finding places in schools for these people to be trained, for the applicants to be trained. Schools are already hard pressed for time. They don't have the capacity. They don't have the funding to support, you know, or to relieve senior teachers for mentoring induction activities. So they are not, you know, willingly going to accept more of these people coming in, and then they have to train them, because it means having to offload some of the more senior teachers, and they don't have the funds to do that. So finding places for trainees is a problem in England. And yeah, the other thing I was going to say is that teachers do enter teaching with the full knowledge that the workload is going to be heavy. They're not naive, and it's only when they reach a point, when there's a threshold beyond which they can't cope, and that is why the support for the leadership, which you mentioned, is very, very important. And in my research, I found that has come across many times. Support from leadership, support from the government, and from parents as well. And also, the working environment has to be conducive. And a lot of, from anecdotal interviews with people, they say that a lot of young teachers are being promoted very quickly to leadership role, and they are not trained, they have no experience. And that is one of the issues we are facing as well in England. And that's something that we have to watch out for as well. Yeah, and the Ofsted, for Finland, you don't have that kind of inspection. We have got Ofsted inspection, the body that monitors and evaluates teachers and schools, and they can be quite punitive. And although we have got what I call a mental health and well-being charter being signed by the government and all the teachers' unions and schools and colleges, that Ofsted inspection should not be punitive, should not be judgmental, it should be supportive. This has never happened actually in practice. So schools are still under pressure to perform.
Hmm.
Ile, can I just
Yes, please.
jump in?
Hmm.
Yeah, because Beng mentioned Singapore, I thought I just want to share that for Singapore, it is not just one thing that is important. I think what is important for the whole thing for teaching to be attractive, we have to put in place different pieces, and they need to be self-reinforcing. It's no point just having high salary trying to attract them. If we don't empower them, they don't see it as meaningful, then you find that if the high salary, you're not going to get the people whom you really want to be in teaching. You want people who see it as a calling, who are not just good academically, but they have the values, and they feel that this is what they want to do because they want to make a difference. So it's the type of people you're attracting.
Yeah.
You will need the salary, of course, to make sure that it's competitive enough to be seen as a high status career. You need to empower them so that they find that they have the support of the principal, they have the resources to do things that make it meaningful. And I think in Singapore, we want to make sure that we take care of our teachers from recruitment to retirement. So one important thing is that a lot of teachers, after the first few years in teaching, you will find that your career is very flat unless you are promoted to be a school leader. So having a way to develop them, to grow them, giving them opportunity to become a senior teacher, a master teacher, a principal master teacher, would encourage the experienced teachers to want to stay. So after going through rigorous training, every time you lose a passionate educator, it's really one too many to lose from the system.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I absolutely agree with you. I think it has to be a coherent policy, not just one aspect, isn't it? Yeah, to support. Yeah, it's not just giving them high salary if the status is not there, and they find that they take the salaries for first few years and then they leave, and that's what we are seeing.
Yeah, Jari?
There is a specific question for Finland, but one issue that has not been mentioned in general is the kind of tolerance for something that is not working well. So I emphasize that we don't have this external quality control. We have internal processes, but I know based on the national monitoring and national follow-up studies that the internal processes are not working well in all schools. So somehow you have to accept that this autonomy is also making harmful effects, and it's not perfect in every school. And also I mentioned that the grading is fully based on teachers' classroom level, classroom-based grading. So it is subjective. It's not so objective than testing, and we tolerate that all the grades that are given by teachers, they are not giving the proper view of the student competence. So that is a challenging issues to make balance with all things, but we have to tolerate those negative sides when we are looking for something that is making it attractive. So there was a question for me about the kindergarten teachers or early, what is that, pre-primary teachers. Yes, we have lack of them, and there are two reasons. So we changed the system that earlier the pre-primary teachers were educated universities and applied universities. And then the government decided that all teachers should be educated at universities. So the universities are not able to take so many students as applied universities and traditional universities together. And then the salary of pre-primary teachers is lower than primary teachers. I mentioned the average salary was 3,000 and something like that. So the pre-primary teacher salary is 2,000, a little bit more. So it is too less to survive in a big city. And that's maybe these are the two reasons: the change of the system and the salary. The salary is important issue as it has been discussed.
Yeah. Yes, in Norway, there's a distinction. Early childhood education teachers are required to have a bachelor's degree, whereas teachers for the compulsory school years and up are required to have a master's degree. So that's still different. But then again, taking a master's degree as an early childhood teacher doesn't necessarily lead to you getting any higher salary either. So that's something that people are working to change now too, huh?
Exactly the same also in Finland.
Yeah. So, Wunchi, I liked your idea of the puzzle. So this is a puzzle that we need different pieces to fit together. And it's not just one thing, and it's not just two things either. It's many things. So I can always try to get people on board here just to post what they think belongs in this puzzle. So if there's anything that you think belongs in this puzzle, then please just post it here and we can see what they are. And then we can also go on to the rest of you to say, okay, what would you think of were the two most important pieces in a puzzle to attract teachers to teaching? Two things that you think are the most important. Then we can build on each other. We can build this puzzle and see if we can get any further and make some recommendations to different people, both policy and teacher education facilities and principals, municipal level, whatever, to find out what would that be. So is there anyone that would like to start of our panelists? Or I just pounce on one of you? Wunjia, yes?
Okay, I think we have to make teaching a meaningful career. If I can only give one, it has to be meaningful. Teachers must feel that they can make a difference. So the support that is given, the resources that they need, they have to be empowered.
Yeah.
So that is my one contribution. It has to be a meaningful career. Then we will attract good people.
Yeah. Yes. Other suggestions? So what do you think would be mostly important? Marilyn, any ideas? You're still on mute, please.
I'll say two things. Nicole Mockler in Australia did a book recently, and she starts it out by saying, teaching in Australia has an image problem. And the same is true in the US, and I think to a certain extent, perhaps in England and some of the other countries that have especially strong recruitment retention problems, there's an image problem. So if there were any way to change the image problem, that's in the media, in the public domain, and so on. And there are a lot of things that could happen that could change the way people think about teaching. But the second one, I think over and over again, research seems to indicate that whether teachers stay has so much to do with the culture of the school and the work environment. So that's really a major, major thing. And I didn't say this before, but I want to mention it. One of the things that I think helps teachers stay is when they're involved in working with other teachers and other educators in communities where they can bring problems and research them and inquire about them together. So I don't mean that they have opportunities just to get together and complain, although that and vent, which can be important sometimes too. But for teachers who are who see themselves as knowledge generators and who see themselves as professionals who can pose problems about what's going on in their classroom or in their school or in the school community relationships, and can gather data and other information and work together to figure out what they might do differently. So that's an example, I think, of teachers who are empowered and feel a sense of agency about their work. And it's part of this bigger picture of the culture of the school and the work environment. So that probably sounded like more than two things, but I meant it to be image problem and work environment, school culture.
Yeah. And combined, I mean, I'm thinking what you said about the working culture and the teacher as a professional knowledge generator can also change the image of teaching, right? So, yeah, they belong nicely together. Jari?
So this answer is belief and also very coming from the one context. So, but first, I fully agree that teacher professionalism and it should be supported by the school and policy side. So that it is actually not only characteristics of individual teacher, it is more characteristics of the system. And the second one is autonomy in all level of education. So I think in Finnish context, these two are the most important, and probably in some other context.
Yeah. Yes, we have a comment here too in the chat. Does clarity of teachers' progression pathway from the induction year onwards help to intensify teachers to become teachers? What are the reasons behind this limited clarity? So the clarity of teachers' progression from the induction year and onwards, what does that have to say for teachers who become teachers or to become teachers? Does it help to know that there is that, like you were talking about, Wunshu, does it help to know that there is a pathway, a career pathway? What do we know about that in case?
Okay, in Singapore, our teachers have a chance to be on 3 different tracks. They can choose to be a teacher and stay on the teaching track, and they progress to be senior teacher, master teacher, principal master teacher. We have teachers who are interested to become leaders, for example. So they will then become head of department and eventually school leaders. So that's the leadership track. We also have teachers who would choose to go on the specialist track, and they would then work maybe on developing national curriculum for our schools. I just want to say that I don't think having the track attracts teachers, but it definitely helps teachers stay in the profession because they are growing, they learn their new responsibility, and that would at least make sure that people who really are genuinely interested in teaching and not leadership would still have something that they can do to influence more than just their own classroom. So the master teacher works with a cluster of schools. The principal master teachers work across the whole of Singapore. Yeah, and a lot of time they will conduct professional development for teachers.
Okay, so that's looking at different systems, huh? So there's also a question perhaps for Marilyn, whether the culture of working together in professional teams could also be a way to make the workload more reasonable. What do you think about that?
I don't know if it actually, I mean, just working in teams certainly doesn't actually reduce the workload, but it often, I think, can be a way of making the workload doable and making it possible to be meeting with other teachers who share similar values, who are trying to make things work for their students in their classroom, sharing problems, sharing ways of addressing those problems, I think can help teachers handle the workload. There are certainly some schools that are really organized in terms of various communities and groups that take on tasks together, that share responsibility for the effectiveness of the school, that everybody's in this together. Whether or not that actually changes the workload, I think depends on the school, but it could certainly have an impact, I think, on how teachers feel they are able to handle the work.
Yeah. There's also a question here or a comment about initial teacher education. And if teacher education adequately prepares teachers for the professions, then perhaps that might also be an element in perceiving manageable working conditions and so on, workload, environment, and support. So, I mean, what role does initial teacher education play in this? In both recruiting and retaining teachers. Any comments on that? I mean, Jari, you have the research-based teacher education, which was very evident in your presentation, and where also the content of teacher education is very research-based, and even the selection processes are research-based. I mean, what do you think about that question?
I think that's very essential, and this is because we have this autonomy, so we are engaging in research and become familiar with the research related to teaching and teacher education. So it's so obvious, it's challenging to think how it could be done in another way in this context where I am living. But I was thinking about this teacher career possibilities. So we do not have any possibilities for career. The teacher is in the top when he or she is starting. This is also somehow good that all teachers are very equal, so they are having the same status. So there are no head teachers or team leaders or whatever. On the other hand, they are equal and they are willing to collaborate. That's another issue. So the career paths, maybe that has two sides, positive and negative. So it's somehow good for autonomy that you are on the top when you are starting. It's not so easy issue.
Yeah. No, it's not an easy issue. I don't think our discussion here is very easy either. I mean, these are complicated questions. For my own perception of this now, I think that listening to what comes out of the different countries, I mean, I can relate to something that goes on in Singapore, I can relate to something that goes on in Finland and then England and the United States. We can hear sort of things that you can relate to all over, but that they are still contextual and historical. And so in that sense, different. But I think that just talking together and raising questions like this is one way too of perhaps understanding our own situation a little bit more, and also seeing some possibilities across countries. And I'm moving into a landing phase now of our talk and this webinar. So we're moving into rounding off our discussion. Yes, great. And I just wanted to have some just final comments from you about what it is that we can round off with, that we feel that we can move ahead with, or that we can use. Or if you have another suggestion, Marilyn.
It's actually a question before we move into that phase that I wanted to ask you, Elaine. Given that Norway now requires a master's degree with a thesis for primary and lower secondary teachers in the 5-year integrated programs, what do you think has been the impact of that on recruitment in Norway? I know that part of the reason for going in that direction, I believe, was that policymakers thought it would make teaching more attractive, because if it requires a master's degree, it sort of carries with it a certain kind of status. What do you think, as a person who has done extensive research on teacher education in Norway and elsewhere? What do you think the impact of that has been?
Very difficult to say. We have not seen an increase in applications to teacher education. So we're still struggling with recruitment to teacher education, whether there was a master's degree or not. So in that sense, we can't really say that we've seen a big difference. It might not be solely dependent on that. I think as Woon-Chee was talking about, this is a puzzle. There are lots of different pieces that fit into this puzzle. Yeah, so that we do not see an effect of. What will be interesting to see is whether we see an effect of introducing a master's degree in the sense that you were talking about, Marilyn, with more professionalized teaching and more teachers interested in school development and in working as researchers of their own practice and in collaboration with each other. And in the long run, of course, that can, of course, influence an image of teaching and what teaching is, not just as deliverers of knowledge, but as creators of knowledge. But it's way too soon to say anything about that. The hope too was, to have a more of a research-based teacher education. That's been an important thing in the whole development and change in Norwegian teacher education. But also, of course, because we know that there's so much knowledge that we really need to use in schools and in our education system, so that we have to be research-based. It is a university degree. So it has to be also conducted by people who are active researchers and who are interested in knowledge development within their own subject areas and within school understanding. So we've taken that on from Finland or wherever. And I think it'll be interesting to see what goes on, but there's so many other things that really play a role in teacher recruitment, I think, than whether the program is a 4-year or a 5-year program. So that's at least my take on it. Yes. So as we see here that we have Beng has commented on that they're analyzing teacher supply situations across OECD and partner countries to understand the political, economic, cultural, and economic influence on teacher supply. That would be interesting to follow that research and other research that's going on too, to see how what it is that can influence teacher supply. And we also know now, of course, that there's so many other occupations. That's one of the things that we were talking about earlier, that before, like you, Marilyn, said too, right, the options of which occupations to choose between were fewer before. There are so many more occupations to choose among now. And women who traditionally chose teaching have so many other options as well. So that it will be a challenge, I think, in the future to also have a good supply. And perhaps we might need to think differently about the organization of school and who works in schools too. Might be one way to reduce workload or to make the working conditions more livable for teachers if they're not responsible for absolutely everything, but have more people they can rely on and work with. Yes, from a more methodological viewpoint, we have a comment here. If we want to get robust research findings on what makes up the attractiveness of the teaching profession, how important is it that research takes into consideration not only the experiences, perceptions, and decision-making of those who end up in choosing teaching as a profession, but also those of young people who ultimately opt for other careers. Yeah. And that's one of the things that we looked at in our review, Beng and colleagues and myself, that there's too much research on teachers who have already chosen teaching, and too little research on those who opt for other careers, really. And what we can do to enhance that.
Yes, yeah. Can I just add, to answer the question? I think we did a survey as well, which looked at all undergraduates from across 53 universities in England, across all disciplines. So we did not only look at all those people who have chosen teaching or people who are training to be teachers. So we asked these people, the undergraduates, what their career drivers are, what they look for in a career, and then we compare their perceptions of teaching as a career as well. And then we compare these groups of people and see how many of these people would like to go into teaching and how many people would not want to go into teaching, and understanding the reasons for their choice of career.
Yeah.
Could I just add here I know this isn't the primary focus of this seminar, but I just want to say to the audience that they ought to read your review that Elaine and Beng did. It's a really, really good, comprehensive review of the literature on recruiting and retaining teachers. And it's very methodical and meticulously done in terms of what studies are considered and not considered. This whole idea of a comparison between those interested and those not interested, it really takes us forward a lot, I think, from where we were. So, and I know it's available on your website or somewhere, it's readily available. So I strongly recommend it. I found it very informative and I learned a lot by reading it.
Well, thank you very much. And you can just get in touch with me, anyone here who's listening, if you can't find it on our website. So just get in touch and we'll make sure that you get it. Yes, and we also see that the topic of attracting mid-career teaching candidates too has also been raised here. And that's one of the things that we also look at a little bit when it comes to different programs that might also be able to recruit teachers, and what kind of evidence do we have on the possibilities of introducing different programs to recruit teachers. That's also an issue when it comes to recruiting. Okay. I don't see any more comments here. Should we round off some words of wisdom to end off our discussion here on recruiting and making teaching more attractive? What do we want to end with? What do we want the takeaway message to be for all of those who have spent an hour and a half together with us now? Jari, what's yours? You started it.
So I think so much have been already said. So this research-based teacher education, the idea was coming to Finland from Sweden in late 60s. So we were in the same, okay, we were much poorer and we were suffering from the war, but we implement the idea. So there is something similar than in Singapore, that in a very poor condition, in a very bad situation, the politicians decided to make huge investment to education and teacher education. In Sweden, they had everything so well, so they were not willing to implement the idea they had, and the strong universities were very much against that. So I think the history can teach also something, that what has been done in a difficult situation, and now we enjoy in Singapore and Finland these clever decisions. So history was not so much emphasized in this discussion, so just ad hoc idea to add something new.
Yeah. Wunshia?
Okay, if I go back to what I said just now, I don't think there is one single thing that would change and make teaching attractive. I think the different parts that has to come together, we have to consider from attracting, the recruitment, and take care of them all the way to retirement. If there is only one thing we can do, then I think making teaching a respected and meaningful career will probably go a long way.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Marilyn?
I just want to add to what Wunjia had just said. Yes, I think teaching has to be a respected career, and I think teachers themselves are ambassadors of their own profession, and they sell their profession. And sometimes you see on Twitter the kind of comments that teachers themselves made, and it's quite off-putting. I think we have to be aware that we are representing our profession and be professional in the sense that we appreciate our own profession and not bash our own profession.
Yeah. Marilyn?
I think that a sort of final comment has to do with, in terms of making teaching more attractive, has to do with the idea of policy borrowing, or maybe even practice borrowing. In the US, of course, we sometimes hear, why can't you be like Finland? Why can't you do what Singapore does? And of course, it's this huge, complex context. The US has almost as many teachers as Singapore and Finland have people. So we can't do what Finland does. We can't do what Singapore does. So I think it's a matter of not borrowing a particular policy or a particular practice, but figuring out what the larger principle is. What's the principle that will make teaching more attractive? And we've talked about it here among the panelists, making teaching more professional, helping create the conditions so teachers can have a sense of agency. So I think that's what we need to work on, not what does this country do, but what is the principle we can learn across, and then how can we figure out how to apply that principle in the context in which we are. And in the US, as I said at the beginning, it's not one policy, it's policies in 50 states, it's 50 sets of policies, and then way more than 50 sets of sub-policies, because many of these policies are at the school district level and the municipality level. So I think this idea of powerful principles that we can figure out how to apply to particular context might be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. Thing, did you have another comment?
Yeah, I just want to, yes, I absolutely agree with Marilyn. I think it has to be contextualized. I think like in England, we borrowed a lot of ideas from other countries, from Singapore. We have similar kind of programs, initiatives, and sometimes it doesn't work because funding is distributed directly to schools. And so schools have the autonomy to use the funding for whatever they want, like for professional development, for mentoring. But then, large part of that funding is used for teacher salary. So they don't really have much money left for other, things. So that is the struggle. And also in England, despite what you hear and read in the media, we are not doing too badly. The positive sign is that we have a lot of people applying into teacher training. But the acceptance rate is very low because the government put a cap on the number of people that can be accepted into teacher training in universities, and that is that reduces the number of people that can be trained, and that is another policy that we have to look at. And then these are issues that we have to consider. So yeah, I think I'll just stop there. I think Jari has got a point to make.
Yes. So Jari, a final comment?
Maybe now I have something to say. So what we can learn from other contexts and other countries, maybe we are not able to take a ready idea as such to our own system, but what we can use and what we can learn is maybe the processes. For example, in Finland, how we make national level guidelines, how we engage teacher educators and stakeholders to the common discussion, how we use internet-based brainstorming tools for looking for consensus understanding, what are the challenges and what are the new type of aims for teacher education, how the research impact to that discussion. Maybe another meeting could be organized in the kind of how the processes are done, what's really how it is done, not the final end. Maybe that is not so interesting than the process as such. Maybe that is something we should focus more.
Yes. And Wuntjia?
Yeah, just to add on to what Jari said, whether it's the processes, I think there's one thing perhaps we have not mentioned is a strong tripartite partnership. The working, the conversation and the working between the ministry or your different local education authority with the universities training the teachers as well as the schools. I think that's something that probably can be strengthened, and when that is strengthened, it will go a long way in terms of supporting teaching teachers.
Thank you. When you started out here, when we had that first round from the 4 countries, I sat here thinking, do we respect education differently in the different countries? Is it really a question of not just teaching and teachers, but education per se? That is also very different from the countries, or these 4 or 5 countries. And that's also an issue at hand that says something about the context and our possibilities. And now at the end of our discussion, I'm thinking that we really have a great topic for further work, really. And that topic would be, as I see it, to try to identify those powerful principles, and also to identify the powerful processes, and perhaps also to identify the powerful partnerships that we need in order to get moving on finding out how we can make teaching even more attractive than it is, because it is already attractive. There are lots of people that choose teaching. We just need to make sure that we have enough teachers that choose teaching and that also remain in teaching and that experience the possibilities of doing a great job in that education sector that really matters so much for all of our countries. So perhaps we'll invite you all for a new webinar, a new discussion on what those issues could be: principles, processes, and partnerships. I want to thank all of you for a fantastic contributions, for taking part in this discussion. And I also want to thank all of you who have been listening in and participating in the chat. And I hope that you've also learned something from this and that you have something to think about in the days and weeks and months and years ahead. So I know that I certainly have. So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elaine, for organizing it.
Thank
Thank
you.
for the invitation,
Elaine.
Elaine. Thank
Yes.
you.